In the dark waters of Guadalcanal, Japanese sailors whispered about an American cruiser that fired so fast it sounded like machine guns tearing through fabric. And they weren't wrong to fear her. USS Helena, CL-50, survived what should have sunk her at Pearl Harbor, and came back with a vengeance that would reshape naval warfare in the Pacific. This is the story of the ship that refused to die, the cruiser that earned her nickname through sheer firepower, and the 1,000 men who turned her into legend. In an era when battleships ruled the seas and aircraft carriers were the future, Helena proved that a determined light cruiser could change the course of history. But her story didn't begin in combat, it began in the depths of the Great Depression. As America slowly rebuilt its economy, the Navy embarked on an ambitious program to modernize its aging fleet. The St. Louis-class cruisers represented a bold new philosophy, ships capable of delivering overwhelming firepower while maintaining the speed to dance with death. When her keel was laid at Brooklyn Navy Yard on a cold December day in 1936, few could have imagined the destiny awaiting hull number 50. The workers riveting her plates and shaping her armor were building more than a warship. They were crafting an instrument of survival and vengeance. Helena stretched 608 feet from bow to stern, her sleek hull cutting through the water with a beam of just 61 feet. But her true glory lay in her guns. 15 6-inch guns, mounted in 5 triple turrets, gave her a broadside that could unleash hell. These weren't ordinary naval rifles. The Mark 16 guns could fire 8 to 10 rounds per minute per barrel, meaning her main battery alone could unleash up to 150 shells a minute. No wonder the Japanese called her the machine gun cruiser. Her secondary battery packed 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns, just as deadly against aircraft as against destroyers. 4 Parsons turbines drove her through the waves at 32.5 knots, powered by 8 Babcock-Wilcox boilers pushing 100,000 horsepower through her 4 bronze screws. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, she could hunt anywhere in the Pacific. But specifications only tell part of the story. What truly made Helena special was her crew, 868 officers and men who transformed steel and gunpowder into something approaching immortality. Helena slipped into the East River on August 27, 1938, christened by the wife of Montana's senator. The champagne bottle smashed across her bow was meant to bring good luck, though whether it did would depend on how you defined luck. Her early career read like a peacetime travelogue. After commissioning in September 1939, Helena sailed south to Uruguay, where her crew got an ominous preview of their future. The wreckage of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee lay in Montevideo harbor, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. Young American sailors stared at the twisted metal, wondering if they were glimpsing their own fate. The Pacific called, and Helena answered. By September 1940, she joined the Pacific Fleet, spending months in Hawaiian waters perfecting her deadly craft. Gunnery drills, damage control exercises, navigation training, the endless repetition that transformed civilians into warriors. As 1941 drew to a close, Helena entered Mare Island Navy Yard for upgrades. The Navy, perhaps sensing the storm approaching, fitted her with new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns. It was like giving a boxer brass knuckles just before a street fight. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Helena rested at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor. Across the harbor, battleships sat in a tidy row along Ford Island. Pennsylvania, the mighty queen of the battle line, was supposed to occupy Helena's berth, but fate had other plans. The dry dock needed Pennsylvania more than the pier needed Helena. At 7:57, Lieutenant Commander Shihaharu Murata led 9 Kate torpedo bombers toward what he believed was Pennsylvania. Through the early morning haze, Helena's profile looked enough like a battleship to seal her fate. Only the lead plane dropped its weapon, a Type 91 torpedo that carved through the harbor at 40 knots. The torpedo passed beneath the mine layer Oglala and struck Helena at frame 75, just below her armor belt. The explosion tore through her engineering spaces like a giant's fist. Engine Room 1 and Boiler Room 2 instantly transformed from orderly machinery spaces into twisted metal coffins. Seawater rushed through a hole big enough to drive a truck through. But Helena was already fighting back. Within 2 minutes, her forward diesel generator roared to life, sending power to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes circled overhead for a second attack, Helena's anti-aircraft guns spoke their defiance. 4 bombs straddled her during the second wave, each near miss showering her decks with steel rain. The ship that should have died stayed afloat through sheer damage control and human determination. 40 of her men lay dead, another 100 wounded, but Helena survived. In the wardroom, blood mixed with oil as medical teams worked to save the living. On deck, gunners stayed at their posts even as shipmates fell around them. The Japanese pilots who reported her sinking had made a terrible mistake. They had awakened the little sister of a sleeping giant, and she would remember. After Pearl Harbor, Helena resembled a patient in intensive care. Water sloshed through her wounded hull, and emergency pumps worked around the clock to keep her afloat. But beneath all the damage, Helena's heart refused to stop beating. By December 9th, just 2 days after the attack, she limped into dry dock number 2. Navy Yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons attending a critical patient. Steel plates were cut, shaped, and welded over her wounds. These temporary patches would hold just long enough for her to reach a proper hospital. The journey to Mare Island in January 1942 tested every weld and rivet. Pacific swells pressed against her patched hull, searching for weakness. Her crew stood vigilant at every damage control station, ready to shore up any breach. They needn't have worried. Helena was tougher than she looked. At Mare Island, Helena underwent a transformation that went far beyond mere repairs. The Navy had learned bitter lessons at Pearl Harbor, and Helena would benefit from that brutal education. Her conning tower, which had limited visibility during night actions, was replaced with an open bridge. Antiquated 1.1-inch Chicago pianos gave way to 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors guns, Swedish-designed democracy wrapped in American steel. But the real revolution came in electronics. Helena received the new SG surface search radar, a marvel that could pierce darkness and fog to detect enemy ships at astonishing ranges. Paired with the new FC and FD fire control radars, Helena could now fight blind, a crucial advantage in the knife fights awaiting her in the Solomons. Darkness could conceal ships, but radar let Helena see without being seen. Under Captain Robert H. English, and later Captain Phillip until September 1942, her crew trained with fanatical intensity. Gunners drilled until they could load and fire in their sleep. Damage control teams practiced plugging holes and fighting fires until their reactions were automatic. Every man aboard understood one thing: they were returning to the Pacific not as victims, but as hunters. In the mess halls, sailors whispered of revenge. In the engine rooms, mechanics coaxed every possible revolution from the turbines. Helena wasn't just repaired, she was reborn as an instrument of vengeance. By July 1942, Helena was ready. Passing beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, bound for the South Pacific, her crew lined the rails. Some waved at girlfriends and wives on shore. Others stared westward, toward the enemy who had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was heading to war. The Solomon Islands in late 1942 were a green hell, where America and Japan bled for every inch of jungle. Guadalcanal, with its crucial airfield, had become the Pacific War's grinding wheel. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot, the channel between the Solomon Islands, to reinforce garrisons and bombard American positions. By early October, Helena served in Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott. Unlike many American admirals still thinking in terms of battleship lines, Scott understood that radar and rapid-fire weapons would rule these waters. He drilled his ships relentlessly in night combat tactics, though curiously he chose USS San Francisco, not radar-equipped Helena, as his flagship. October 11, 1942, the day of reckoning. American reconnaissance planes spotted Admiral Aritomo Goto's force streaming toward Guadalcanal, 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers loaded with reinforcements and bombardment shells. Scott positioned his force off Cape Esperance, ready to spring history's trap. As darkness fell, Helena's SG radar operator, radioman 3rd Class Robert S. Brown, hunched over his scope. At 23:25, a phosphorescent blip appeared, enemy ships at 27,700 yards. Helena had found the Japanese before they even knew Americans were hunting. What followed was organized chaos. Scott, operating blind on San Francisco, ordered a column turn that accidentally placed his force across the Japanese T, the perfect position for a naval ambush. On Helena's bridge, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, who had taken command in September, grew increasingly frustrated. His radar showed enemy ships at 5,000 yards, practically point-blank, but Scott hadn't given permission to fire. Finally, at 23:46, Scott's ambiguous Roger was interpreted as permission to engage. Helena's turrets, already trained on the enemy, erupted in violence. The first salvo caught the heavy cruiser Ioba completely unprepared. 6-inch shells slammed into her bridge, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. The Japanese admiral died believing his own ships were firing on him. He never imagined Americans could strike from the darkness with such deadly precision. Helena's guns fired at rates that seemed impossible. Spent brass casings rolled across her decks like golden rain, loaders working in perfect synchronization. Muzzle flashes lit up the night, earning Helena the nickname that would follow her forever. The heavy cruiser Furutaka tried to shield the flagship, but sailed straight into a steel hurricane. Helena's shells struck her torpedo tubes, detonating Japan's most feared weapons on deck. Furutaka burned like a Viking funeral ship before sliding beneath the black waters. In just 14 minutes, it was over. Helena had fired over 1,400 rounds, her barrels glowing cherry red in the darkness. The Battle of Cape Esperance marked America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Navy. Helena had proven that American cruisers could fight and win, at night, the enemy's chosen battlefield. As dawn broke, oil slicks and debris marked where Japanese ships had died, a testament to the machine gun cruiser's deadly return. Helena's crew, exhausted but exhilarated, had tasted victory, and it wouldn't be their last. November 1942 brought desperation to both sides at Guadalcanal. The Japanese were preparing a massive reinforcement convoy, and Admiral Scott's victorious task force, now led by Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, stood as the only barrier. Callahan, brave but inexperienced in night combat, made the same critical mistake as Scott. He chose San Francisco as his flagship instead of radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12th to 13th, Helena's radar once again proved prophetic. At 1:24, her SG scope detected Japanese ships entering Iron Bottom Sound, the grim waters of Guadalcanal, littered with so many wrecks they'd earned their chilling nickname. 2 Japanese battleships, High A and Kirishima, led a bombardment force meant to pulverize Henderson Field. What erupted at 1:48 was less a battle than a bar fight with 14-inch guns. The American column practically collided with the Japanese force. Ships fired at point-blank range, often unsure if they were targeting friend or foe. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness. Star shells burst overhead, tracers crisscrossing like deadly fireworks. Helena's radar gave her a critical edge. While other ships struggled to identify targets, her fire control tracked Japanese vessels with surgical precision. She opened fire on what her crew believed was a battleship, just 4,200 yards away. Rapid-fire salvos walked up and down the enemy's length, sparking fires and explosions. The destroyer Akatsuki made a fatal mistake, illuminating Helena with her searchlight. Every American ship that could bear immediately focused on her. Helena's 6-inch shells joined 5-inch and 8-inch rounds in a deadly convergence that tore Akatsuki apart. She vanished in a massive explosion, taking all but a handful of her crew with her. Helena then shifted to rapid fire against 3 more destroyers. Her guns cycled so fast that Japanese survivors thought the Americans had invented a new automatic cannon. 1 destroyer limped away burning, another went dead in the water, and the third fled into the darkness trailing smoke. Through it all, Helena danced between salvos, her engineers pushing turbines beyond their limits. At one point, San Francisco crossed directly between Helena and her target, forcing a check fire that probably saved American lives. Friendly fire that night claimed Admiral Callahan and Captain Cassin Young of San Francisco, brave men killed by confusion in the chaos. After 40 minutes of savage point-blank fighting, The Japanese withdrew, battered by dozens of hits, including many from Helena. One Japanese battleship, crippled and jammed, would be finished off by American planes the next morning, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Helena emerged with one man dead and minor damage. Her gunners had fired over 1,500 rounds, her barrels worn out from sustained fire. But she had stopped the Tokyo Express cold. Without that bombardment, Henderson Field would have fallen, and Japanese transports would have run rampant in the coming days. As November 13th dawned, Iron Bottom Sound lived up to its name with new wrecks littering the seafloor. Helena had proven herself again, but the cost of war grew steeper with every battle. Between legendary fights, life aboard Helena was a grinding routine that tested men as thoroughly as combat. The Solomon Islands offered no respite. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. Helena's crew developed the 1,000-yard stare common to Guadalcanal veterans, men aged beyond their years by constant vigilance. Life aboard Helena followed the rhythm of war, general quarters at dawn and dusk when submarines preferred to attack, days spent bombarding Japanese positions, turning jungle strongpoints into moonscapes, patrols along the slot, radar operators straining to catch the first glimpse of enemy vessels. The crew developed their own culture, born of shared danger. Helena's laundry became legendary, somehow maintaining pressed uniforms even after battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hot Ton Tots, played swing music on deck between actions, their jazzy renditions of blues in the night carrying across the water to other ships. Food was whatever the supply ships brought, spam, powdered eggs, and coffee strong enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were memories. When the ice cream maker worked, it produced the most valuable commodity in the South Pacific. Men would trade almost anything for a Dixie cup of vanilla. Captain Hoover proved a steady hand. Unlike glory-seeking officers, he understood that survival meant victory in these waters. He drilled his crew constantly but knew when to ease the pressure. Movie nights on the fantail, boxing matches on the forecastle, small pleasures that reminded men what they were fighting for. The November 23rd relief of Captain Hoover for failing to adequately report the torpedoing of USS Juneau struck the crew hard. They had fought through hell together, only to lose their skipper over what many saw as a bureaucratic vendetta. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, who assumed command in December 1942, had to win over a suspicious crew. Cecil would lead them through their final battles. December 1942 and January 1943 blurred together in routine and exhaustion. Helena bombarded Japanese positions at VR and Munda, supported troop convoys, and chased ghosts on radar screens. Her crew became experts at reading the sea and sky, knowing that survival often depended on spotting the torpedo wake, or the flash of a bomb release, a second before it struck. By February 1943, Helena desperately needed yard time. Her engines wheezed, her guns showed worn rifling, and her hull bore the scars of near misses. The voyage to Sydney, Australia felt like sailing to paradise. Fresh food, cold beer, and women who spoke English awaited. For a few precious weeks, Helena's men remembered what peace felt like. But wars don't pause for liberty. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns refreshed and her crew rested. The next phase of the island campaign beckoned, and the nightly runs down the slot continued. The machine gun cruiser had more work to do. As spring turned to summer 1943, American forces prepared to leap up the Solomon chain. New Georgia, with its airfield at Munda, represented the next bloody step toward Tokyo. Helena played her part in preliminary bombardments, turning Japanese positions into rubble. The routine had become deadly familiar: slip into contested waters under darkness, pummel assigned targets, and escape before dawn brought retribution. On May 13th, Helena led a bombardment group against VR, her shells walking through fuel dumps and barracks with methodical precision. The Japanese, learning from experience, had moved most assets inland, but Helena's guns still found plenty to destroy. June 1943 brought intensified operations. Intelligence reported massive Japanese reinforcement efforts, and every American cruiser worked overtime to interdict them. Helena's crew, now veterans, prepared the ship with grim efficiency. Extra ammunition filled her magazines, damage control materials were prepositioned, and men wrote letters home just in case. On June 30th, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia, began. Helena provided fire support for the landings at Relive, her 6-inch shells clearing jungle in 100-yard swaths. Japanese shore batteries replied sporadically, their splashes walking toward Helena until counter-battery fire silenced them. July 4, 1943, Independence Day, found Helena bombarding Munda Airfield. Japanese reinforcements had strengthened anti-aircraft positions, and black puffs of flak dotted the sky. Helena's anti-aircraft guns replied, 40mm rounds creating their own deadly fireworks display. Democracy versus fascism traced in tracer rounds. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's work. Intelligence had spotted a Tokyo Express run, destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena as a key component, would intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed something different about this mission. Maybe it was the full moon, robbing the Americans of the darkness that usually concealed their ships. Perhaps it was the reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy runs. Or maybe it was just the law of averages catching up. Helena had survived too many battles without serious damage. As July 5th became July 6th, Helena entered Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, the best in the fleet, would spot the enemy first. As always, her guns would speak with characteristic rapid fury. But this time, the enemy would punch back with a vengeance that even the machine gun cruiser couldn't survive. The moon rose over Kula Gulf like a spotlight, turning black waters silver and robbing the Americans of concealment. Admiral Walden Ainsworth, flying his flag in Honolulu, led Task Force 68 into the Gulf just after midnight. Helena followed in column, her radar already painting contacts to the northwest. The Japanese had learned from past encounters. Admiral Teru Okiyoma's reinforcement group included 10 destroyers armed with deadly Type 93 long lance torpedoes, capable of striking 20,000 yards at 49 knots. More critically, the Japanese had finally developed tactics to counter American radar advantages. At 1:36, Helena's radar detected the enemy at 22,000 yards. For once, Japanese radar operators matched American detection, spotting Task Force 68 almost simultaneously. Both sides began their deadly approach, knowing this would be a gunfight where speed mattered more than armor. At 1:57, Admiral Ainsworth ordered the attack. Helena's turrets, already tracking targets, erupted immediately. Her first salvos targeted the destroyer Nyazuki, Admiral Okiyoma's flagship. The range was 11,000 yards, comfortable for Helena's seasoned gun crews. Nyazuki never had a chance. Helena's second salvo struck, and subsequent shells turned the destroyer into a floating inferno. 6-inch rounds detonated her torpedo warheads, shattered her bridge, and opened her hull like a can opener. Admiral Okiyama died in the opening minutes, his last sight the muzzle flashes spelling his doom. But even as Nyazuki sank, her sisters launched their long lance torpedoes. 10 destroyers fired volleys before retreating at high speed, a tactic trading gunfire for torpedo accuracy. Nearly 50 torpedoes now raced through Kula Gulf toward the American column. Helena shifted fire to the destroyer Suzuki, her radar-directed shells finding the target despite the range. But she had made a critical error. Her initial salvos used flashless powder carefully hoarded for night actions. When those charges ran out, she switched to standard propellant. Each salvo now lit up the night like lightning, clearly marking Helena's position for Japanese torpedo directors. At 2:03, Helena's luck finally ran out. 3 long lance torpedoes struck in quick succession, and the machine gun cruiser's death began. The first torpedo hit forward of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Either her forward magazine detonated, or the 1,080-pound warhead obliterated her bow. Turret 1 vanished in a pillar of flame reaching 200 feet skyward. The blast rolled through the ship, buckling bulkheads and throwing men against steel walls like rag dolls. Before damage control could respond, the second and third torpedoes hit amidships, below her armor belt. These strikes broke Helena's keel, the ship's backbone. Engine rooms flooded instantly, turbines screamed to a halt, and electrical power failed, plunging compartments into darkness broken only by battle lanterns and flames. Captain Cecil immediately recognized the fatal nature of Helena's wounds. With the keel broken, the ship was already jackknifing. He passed the order all captains dread: abandon ship. Yet Helena's gunners weren't finished. Even as she sank, her aft turrets continued firing, crews refusing to leave their posts until the last possible moment. Turret 4 fired until seawater flooded the handling rooms. Turret 5's crew manually trained their guns, firing until the list made elevation impossible. The ship broke into 3 sections. The bow, everything forward of Turret 2, vanished. The stern, containing nearly 400 men, floated independently. The center section, holding the bridge and most engineering spaces, rolled over and sank within minutes. Men struggled in oil-slicked waters, some wounded, all shocked by the sudden transition from combat to survival. The destroyer Nicholas, risking torpedo attack, moved in to rescue survivors. Her crew pulled exhausted men aboard while her guns engaged Japanese destroyers trying to finish off Helena's crew. At dawn on July 6, Kula Gulf was littered with debris, and nearly 500 Helena survivors remained in the water. The bow and stern sections floated, serving as temporary life rafts. But Japanese aircraft would arrive with daylight. Admiral Ainsworth faced a harrowing decision. Nicholas and Radford had pulled 739 men from the water during the night, forming human chains to haul oil-soaked survivors aboard. Yet radar showed Japanese warships still in the area, and dawn meant certain air attack. Ainsworth ordered withdrawal, leaving hundreds behind. For those in the water, July 6 became a test of endurance and will. The tropical sun burned exposed skin while saltwater tortured wounds. Sharks, drawn by blood, circled survivors. Men grouped together, supporting the wounded and sharing scarce life rafts. On Helena's floating stern, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chu organized survivors. The section still held some food, water, and medical supplies. Chu established watches, rationed supplies, and maintained discipline. When Japanese floatplanes strafed them, men dove beneath twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers attempted rescue but were driven off. Survivors spent another night clinging to wreckage, their numbers diminishing as wounded men slipped away and sharks took their toll. The story might have ended there, but Coast Watcher Reverend A.W.E. Sylvester on Vella Lavella Island reported the survivors' location and coordinated local natives to guide rescue efforts. On the night of July 7 or 8, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with fast transports Dent and Waters, returned to Kula Gulf. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, they pulled 165 men from the water and the floating stern. The stern finally sank during the rescue, as if Helena waited to ensure her crew was safe before taking her final plunge. Meanwhile, 88 survivors had drifted to Japanese-held Vella Lavella. For a week, they evaded enemy patrols with help from native scouts and coast watchers, living on coconuts and rainwater, moving only at night, until July 16 when destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gidley, and Ralph Talbot executed a daring daylight rescue. Of Helena's 868 crew, 168 died in Kula Gulf or during rescue operations, but 700 survived, saved by courageous destroyer crews and the determination of men who refused to give up. Helena's story could have ended in Kula Gulf, another casualty in the grinding Solomon Islands campaign. But legends don't die easily. In Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, veterans told tales of the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had a right to. Her rapid-fire barrages became the stuff of myth, growing with each retelling. The Navy recognized Helena's extraordinary service with 7 battle stars and the first ever Navy unit commendation awarded to a ship, specifically citing Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, 3 battles where Helena's guns helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Her legacy extended beyond medals. Helena's combat experiences reshaped American naval tactics and technology. Her successful use of radar in night battles became standard doctrine. The critical importance of flashless powder was written in blood. Damage control procedures across the Navy were forever revised because of Helena's loss. 4 decades, she rested undisturbed in the waters of Kula Gulf, her exact location unknown. Survivors held reunions, their numbers dwindling each year, yet their memories remained sharp. They remembered the thunder of her guns, the feel of her deck plates beneath their feet, and the friends who never made it home. Then, in April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel, RV Petrel, located Helena at a depth of 2,800 feet. Remote cameras revealed her hull number, 50, still visible on her stern. Her turrets remained trained outward, as if ready to resume the fight. The discovery brought closure to surviving crew members and their families, finally confirming the final resting place of a ship that had lived and died in battle. Today, Helena serves as more than a war grave. She represents the thousands of sailors who fought the decisive naval battles of World War II. Her story teaches timeless lessons about courage, determination, and sacrifice. The ship that survived Pearl Harbor to become the scourge of the Tokyo Express proved that heroes aren't always invincible. Sometimes, they're simply too stubborn to quit. From her birth in Depression-era Brooklyn to her death in the tropical waters of the Solomons, Helena embodied the American war effort. Built by workers who needed jobs, crewed by boys who became men, and commanded by officers learning to fight a new kind of war, she was democracy forged in steel. The Japanese were right to fear the ship they called a machine gun cruiser, but Helena was more than rapid-firing guns and advanced radar. She was 868 Americans refusing to accept defeat, turning the tragedy at Pearl Harbor into triumph at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in death, she exacted a final toll, her guns firing until the water claimed them. In the depths of Kula Gulf, Helena keeps her last watch. Coral grows on her turrets. Fish swim through her passages. But her legacy endures. She remains what she always was, a fighting ship that earned her nickname through sheer determination, a testament to the generation that saved the world. They called her the machine gun, and she lived up to her name until the very end. In the annals of naval history, few ships fought harder, died more courageously, or left a prouder legacy than USS Helena, CL-50. She was, as her crew always knew, one hell of a fighting ship.